All right. You know, we have heard from the president. He says he will turn all those kids around and send them back home. So far, about half of them have vanished, didn't show up for their court dates that have come up on the docket. And yet, yesterday, the United States of America, in a relatively symbolic move, sent of the close to what, 50, 60, 70,000 in that airplane back to Honduras, sent back 38 illegals. All right. And this is curious because it seems like the White House is kind of changing their tune. Last week, Josh Earnest, the new press secretary, had said that the illegals will be quickly deported, you know, after it's adjudicated, provided they show up for their court dates. But then yesterday he said, if somebody needs asylum, we're going to give it to them. So it's kind of a mixed message there. Yeah,
they can't get their story straight. So 38 out of, what, 50,000? The number doesn't sound too good to anybody there. Border sounds much more open than closed when you look at the figures and percentage there. And it certainly is understandable then why two lawmakers in a bipartisan effort are announcing a bill called a humane bill to actually change that and expedite the removal of kids who are here illegally at the border. It's really shortening. And Peter, you can speak to this.
It is.
The time that they would have to see a judge.
It's a kind of interesting progressive move. Progressive in terms of an improvement. He's saying under the Humane Act, Senator Cornyn and Representative Cuellar are saying that within 7 days of entering the country, these children would see an immigration judge, after which the judge would determine whether the child could stay within 72 hours, whether there was some issue in terms of child trafficking, whether the child was in fact a refugee and it would be dangerous to go back to the country. Let's hear what Senator Cornyn and Representative Cuellar had to say on Greta last night.
Sometimes the notice to appear is called among law enforcement professionals a notice to disappear, but it's being called among the migrants, it's called a permiso. In other words, they think this is actually a visa which allows them to stay in the United States, when in fact it's a notice to appear, which they never end up appearing.
Right now we got about 375,000 kids that are still in backlog. 375,000. It takes 3 to 5 years to get to those cases. So therefore, all that the senator and I are trying to do is to give them a speedy trial date, have them before a judge as soon as possible, give them their asylum or their credible fear, whatever claim, and then after that, if they don't show that they have those claims, then they have to be returned.
Okay. Sounds like a practical solution.
Well, I don't know if it is or not. Keep in mind, the reason these kids from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador are able to stay here is because back in 2008, there was this anti-sex trafficking law overwhelmingly passed. I mean, who could possibly stand in the way of something like that? And so when you're from a non-contiguous country, when you're not from Mexico or Canada, you wind up in this country. But Peter, and you can speak to this, why don't they simply make the law, get rid of that law, and simply say, you know, give the people who come into this land the same provisions that you do the Canadians and the Mexicans.
Or is it
just stop them at the border?
That's one way of doing it. I think what they're trying to do is saying, we're going to hold these children in protective custody, A, for their own benefit, for their own interest, but also for American interest, to make sure that they don't go out into the population, perhaps with their illegal relatives in this country who have paid $5,000 to $7,000 for them to come here. And we exposed last week that less than 5%, based on the federal government's own numbers of these unaccompanied children, go back in the first year. Right. These hearings can go on for years, and then the children can become an adult. The bigger issue that we're now finding out, and we're going to talk about even more about it, is how many of these children are gang members and are being recruited into gangs. So what have we unleashed in terms of this country?
The MS-13 gang is what you're speaking of specifically. We're going to talk to someone from the Border Patrol who's going to tell us more about that gang, what you need to know, and how many of those young individuals are tied to that gang. So 38 back to Honduras.
Out of 57,000.